What is your best advice for TAing a lab-based course?
My advice for TAing a lab-based course would be to prepare your pre-lab talk and practice it at least once. Don't try to wing it. Think about the things that could go wrong in the lab and address them in the pre-lab talk to try and head things off at the pass.
My best advice for a lab-based course TA would be that they should explain the theory of the lab in class and explain the procedure during the experiment. Otherwise, there will be no time to explain theory and students would not know why they're doing the lab.
When you give a lab, the most important part, and I think that would be my advice, is to prepare a very, very good pre-lab talk. In the pre-lab talk, you have to outline the objectives of the lab and also how those objectives will help you with the main course. So how those objectives fit into the main course. And also, and this is also very important, I think safety precautions. So you have to tell the students that they are in a lab and sometimes accidents can happen, so they have to be ready, they have to be aware of the environment.
So in my case, this is earth science. It's a lot of samples and thin sections. So most of the time I like to come very early to see all samples myself and to be prepared and think also ahead what would be the question, and this way I'm well prepared and I'm always happy to help because I know what's going on.
If at all possible, I would always recommend that you come to the lab at least 10 to 15, maybe even 20 minutes beforehand, just to prepare everything that you're going to need for your students, but also for yourself, so you're better prepared. And I also like to write any formulas or conversion factors on the board that the students might be dealing with the current lab. And I also tend to draw any complicated diagrams on the board, go through them together.
My advice is to do the labs. I've TA'd a GIS course a couple of times, and the only way to really prepare yourself for the lab is to do it beforehand. As a TA, if you do the lab before, you can think in the frame of teaching it, and if there's a step missing, you might pick that up. You might find something that is going to create an error, and you can correct that beforehand, or you can at least alert your students to that issue, and they can actually learn through that experience of overcoming an error within a program.
Do not do experiments or simulations for students, just guide them so that they could obtain the results themselves. And when you're teaching a lab course, you have to be always around and help people who need that.
I would say that my best advice for TAing a lab course, especially if it's a first or second year lab course, is to assume that basic skills need to be taught, because sometimes the roadblock can be just as simple as not knowing what pipette to use or not knowing the most efficient order to do an experiment in. So help guide students, at least for the first time, through all of the skills that you might think are basic, but some people might be lacking.
Last but not least, I always ask my students before I let them, have free reign of the lab session. I always like to ask them if they have any initial questions before getting started and working by themselves or in groups. And then what that does is if one student has a question right from the get-go, odds are half the other students probably have that exact same question. So this will also benefit you because it will hopefully save you from having to explain the same thing numerous times throughout the lab session.